Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. Today joining me is the lovely Alf Lizzio, who I have been a long time fan of, which is slightly embarrassing for Alf, I'm sure. Alf is currently the Dean and Director of the Centre for Learning Futures at Griffith University, and they focus on facilitating organisational learning and development in the higher education sector. He leads a team of talented and committed staff, designing and developing innovative student learning environments, developing academic leaders, and contributing to evidence-informed practice, as well as facilitating student success and employability. A psychologist by training, Alf started in the areas of youth unemployment, child and family and corrective services, and this was followed by roles incorporating leadership and management development, team effectiveness, and program design and evaluation. Alf came to higher education with the goal of advancing an approach to education that intentionally integrated theory and practice and valued the necessary synergy of personal and professional development. Alf is particularly passionate about education and the difference it can make in enriching our personal and professional worldviews. So I'd like to welcome you, Alf. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tanya. Appreciate the invitation. Thank you.
So I guess for many of us, it's certainly something I've seen across the sector, is we discount past and lived experiences in our current work, particularly where it seems out of sync of what we do on a daily basis. So reflecting on your own diverse background, how does a person's background contribute to the work, and particularly your work, that you're doing now in enhancing student experience?
So a bit of a life story, eh? All right, okay. So imagine a young boy, no more than a boy, raised in a country town, who did reasonably well at school and thought, oh, maybe I'll go further, but with zero understanding of what that meant. And so got in a train. It was a train in those days, not a plane. Got in a train to come to Brisbane to, quote, go to uni. First in family, no mental maps whatsoever for that experience. Arrived and frankly spent the first 6 months in total shock about what the hell was going on. And you know, that experience has stayed with me for a long time. You know, multiple transitions in there from country to city. You know, from big fish in a small pond to tadpole in a giant ocean, et cetera, et cetera. And I've always been then acutely aware then, because of that experience, of the dynamics of transition in people's lives and just what's involved to bridge those transitions. And so, you know, I often reflect back on that. Now, that story has an interesting ending because I enrolled in a degree of Bachelor of Commerce and Bachelor of Law. And my career guidance consisted of watching a TV program called Perry Mason on black and white television. And I thought, oh, that looks like a career choice. And it just shows the paucity of the support that was available in those days. And so you know how this story is going to end. It's going to end in a road crash. So I struggled through first year thinking, what the hell am I doing here? And this is not fun at all. But through persistence, got myself into second year. And then the wheels just totally fell off. It was just like, and I just failed everything. You know, it was just kind of like dropping out in a big way. And then I thought, oh, I'll come back again and I'll just try again. And I sort of did an arts degree, started an arts degree. But that was just palliative care, really, because I didn't even know why I was at uni or anything like that. So I just basically dropped out of uni after that for about 7 years until I grew up, basically, and worked out what I want to do with my life. And it's really reinforced me the importance of a sense of purpose for students.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what you're doing, you've got no wind under your wings at all, you know. So I often reflect on the value of that failure experience for me and what I learned from that, and I brought that empathically back to my practice these days, you know. So I came back to uni in my late 20s, early 30s as a mature age student. Did the study after that. I studied what was called distance education, not even online education. Things came in a package in the mail. And I did really, really well because I knew that I wanted to do what I wanted to do and how to do it at that stage. So, it's all about alignment with purpose, So that's the first part of my story of lived experience bringing to practice. I have other aspects of my lived experience that are enriching for what I do now, but I think we forget what it's like to be young and hopeless. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Academics, we're in love with that discipline, and we expect that to be contagious, but it just isn't. It's not an infection model, So, does that make sense from your perspective? Do you have a similar story?
Yeah, I can still remember sitting in my first lectures, looking around at everyone going, what do I do? Like,
yes.
And everyone's just writing down whatever's on the overhead because, that's where I was too. So it's like,
you had
okay, I'll just
overheads.
do that. Yeah, we had overheads.
We
were highly technical.
Overheads, wow. We just had some law lecturer talking into the ether.
Oh, nice.
No visual mode at all. That's interesting. Anyway, so much for nostalgia. Yeah, that's right. But, so I went back, did my psych degree later as a mature age student, mature being 30 if that counts, I don't know. And then went into private practice, worked in public sector and private practice, and really got immersed in the value of practice as the great teacher, learning experientially, learning from colleagues, learning where your comfort zones are and then stretching them, the good stuff that you do, and learning from that experience about just how unsupported new graduates were. I worked in a department called Children's Services in those days, and the average life expectancy of a new graduate was 18 months because the work was so tough. And because the universities were continually producing new graduates, the system just kept consuming them, and no one recognized the problem that we would just take them in, chew them up, spit them out, and new ones would come. And so I think both in the transition out space, we don't do it well. Transition in space, we don't do well, but the transition out space, we're equally culpable. So once again, it's this notion of transition and preparing people for what's ahead of them and giving them the resources they need. And to cut a long story short, after about 10, 12 years in professional practice, Griffith set up a degree program which was intentionally based on the integration of theory and practice. And my eyes sparkled and I thought, this is what we need. This is the next. So that actually drew me back into higher education. And I did a PhD part-time because in those days you could get hired as a lecturer without a PhD. But they said, you've got skills. Quick, come in. We need some skills. I'm not sure if that narrative still holds true, but anyhow. And so we created from the ground up the #1 rating psychology program in Australia because we did theory practice integration, which is the only program in Australia that did that explicitly. And it's looking back, a moment of great pride for us because, our graduates were in great demand because they could not only talk about it, they could actually do it. And employers were knocking down the door for that sort of stuff. But like most things, we decided to get respectable. We thought, no, we can't be too out on the edge and be too practical. We have to bring them back to the middle and have more academic rigor. And so, as is the fate of most innovations, you lose the edge and you become respectable at your own risk. And so those things go through life cycles. Nothing is forever. Yes. So anyway, that's a kind of cook's tour of some of the lived experience that I've had and how that informs me today. I think the importance of purpose, I think that's really important to give people a sense of purpose. The importance of managing transitions intentionally, explicitly. Even at the course level, there are transitions to be managed all over the place, but we need to do them intentionally. And the importance, I think, of authenticity as an educator and being engaged there, bringing your whole self into the space. Students respond to that. I always say to staff, you cannot, there's a lot of discussion in the section at the moment about engagement, student engagement. Yeah. And I say to staff, look, enough with the theory of engagement. You cannot engage students from a personally disengaged position. If you're not engaged, don't expect them to engage. It's a two-way street. Authenticity is the secret sauce for all that sort of stuff. And then I will get the pushback saying, yes, but, big classes, they overwhelm us, I've got very busy. I'm going, well, you've got to make some choices here about where you invest yourself, So how's that for the answer to the first question?
I like it. And one of the things and you sort of touched on it, particularly with the sense of purpose, is the 5 senses of student success that you developed. Right.
Yes.
So do you want to talk us through about those 5 and how they sort of fit in together with the learning experience?
it's Kurt Lewin, who's a great social scientist in the 40s and 50s, said, "There's nothing quite so practical as a good theory." And he's right in the sense that what it does is it creates a shared language. We can talk about things, you know. And my intention there was to create a shared language between staff and students, something so simple that they both could talk to each other about what was happening for both of them. And so it was just an attempt to, almost an example of cross-cultural communication to bridge them and us, if you like. And so basically what I did was I just spoke to students, I interrogated lecturer, and I said, look, you know, at the end of the day, this is really quite a simple task. There are 5 areas where we need to develop our academic muscles in. The number 1 is identity. You know, the sense of developing your identity as a student, and developing the sense that you deserve to be here, and that this is something that will be validated in your life. And you see this a lot in first generation students, where unless you've got family capital that says this is an expected part of your future, you don't have an activating scheme in your head that says, yeah, this is who you're going to be. This is something you can claim confidently. You're quite tenuous in claiming that as a legitimate part of your life. And so with a shaky identity, everything else gets shaky as well. So that sense of entitlement to be here, fundamental. So that's the heart or the engine room of the whole thing. And so I spent a lot of time with students affirming their value, affirming the fact that they should be here and are deserving of being here, and saying, don't look for evidence that you don't belong, because any little failure will be construed as evidence that you don't belong. Stop that self-talk. And I talk about it as academic hygiene. Get your hygiene right. Don't be disabling yourself with that sort of talk. So identity is the beating heart. And then the other 4 enablers are purpose, which is why am I here and what do I hope to achieve? And I think as academics, we do our students a great disservice. We can do purpose-based talk so quickly. You know, what's the purpose of this course? Where does it fit? What skills will you get? How will this align with career? These are just simple low-hanging fruit. It doesn't take 5 minutes to do it, you know. But we jump straight into the discipline stuff and talk about the content. Just step back a bit and talk about context, you know. So purpose is really important. Capability is the other key bit of this, which is, you know, the biggest mistake that we do to students is not tell them that university learning is different to high school learning or other forms of learning. And there are rules of the game and there's hidden curriculums and we need to deconstruct it. And we just make this tacit stuff explicit. They can develop the skills, but we don't tell them that. We just kind of, I'm going to get on with the content again, you know? Yeah. Or when we do talk about it, we talk about it in terms of study skills. And it's a lot more than just study skills. It's mindset. It's all sorts of stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Third bit is connection, which is relationships. We know from the stress research that relationships are a buffer. They're protective. If you've got relationships, you're going to be more able to get through difficulty and roadblocks, and more able to learn with peers. And then finally, resourcefulness, which is the 4th kind of wrap around identity, is pretty much being able to navigate your work-life balance. You know, I say to students, you know, when the university gives 10 credit points to a course, this might be secret knowledge for you, but 10 credit points equals 10 hours work a week. Well, if they all fall off their chairs going, what? That's 40 hours a week with 4 courses. I'm going, yep. Now, for whom was that a surprise? They all put their hands up. Now, let's deconstruct your lives about where you're going to stick 40 hours into this already full life you've got. And so these are the skills of self-regulation and time management. And that's where so many kids fall off the perch. They really do. You know, we don't help them self-regulate that complex space, you know, and navigate the university system for help. So yes, anyhow, 5 senses was just trying to name what we know to be common sense stuff that you have to manage, but then making that discussable, and then using that framework as a design tool for orientation, for first year courses and so on. So, you know, simple, but the key thing is having the conversation, you know.
Yeah, and that's what I really love about it. It's something I've used since I've been designing student leadership programs since 2015, and it just say it's like, this is the framework. How do you feel about each of these? Where are your gaps? Not exactly, you know, where are the gaps to the overall, you know, program or anything else, but looking at people as individuals, because the perspective is going to be different for each one.
Absolutely. Someone might have a really strong sense of purpose, but absolutely complex life, You know, we get a lot of people who've got complex family lives, that they're caregivers. How are you going to manage all that and do this? You know, you're going to be very intentional about it. Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. And at the same time, we're wanting them to, like, as you say, be more engaged, to volunteer, to do this, to do that. And then they've got all those other things. And we're still thinking in that old school, you've only got university, you don't have all these other things.
Exactly right. Because you're all independently wealthy. That's right. Yes.
Oh, yeah,
that's right.
yeah.
That's right.
Yes. I'm excited. So talking about the Learning Futures program, so what are some of the insights that you might be able to share with us about the future of higher education and its role in the future of learning? Because there's obviously alternatives.
Yeah. Look, I think the big narrative shift that's happened in the last 5 years, and it's going to exponentially increase, is the shift from teaching to design for learning. The old paradigm is teaching content, and learning is a kind of, well, good luck with making that as an outcome, versus we design now explicitly for learning in mind. And design for learning is a growing body of knowledge and skill, and we know increasingly how to do that. But the shift to design, and I think what that signals for the first time is that we've spent in the traditional narrative a lot of energy on trying to make students university ready. Now we're shifting the narrative to say, let's make university student ready. And that's just got to blow some people's minds, but that's what we've got to do. You know, that's what student diversity requires us to do. That's what common sense requires us to do, but that's another story. And for the first time, we have to be emotionally and intellectually honest and say to ourselves, we need to design a self-involving narrative around what makes the student success. Historically, student success has been a function, or a narrative has been a function of what's wrong with the student, the wrong demographics, the wrong ATAR, et cetera, their lives are too complex. And so we found self-involving explanations for why students fail. If we're honest about it, we are also equally complicit in the failure success narrative. And so I think that's where the shift from teaching to design actually puts us in the frame. We put ourselves in the frame and the quality of our course design in the frame. And that's a big stretch. And you said new skills there, but also
mindset shift.
Exactly right. But it's the only game in town, really, if we're serious, honestly, you know. And it shifts that whole experience from co-curricular palliative to curricular main game, you know. Let's have 4,000 peer mentoring programs, but the courses are so badly designed, no amount of peer mentoring is ever going to save a student, you know what I mean? So it's a shift to honesty. And I think the key factor there is having more courageous academic leadership. We need leaders to stand in that space and say, guys, this is the new narrative. I know it's painful. I know it's a big stretch, but without courageous leadership, we're not going to make that. We'll get lost in complaint, you know, angst, or worse still, lost in nostalgia for the good old days when somehow it was easier. Because they were easier because when student fails, no one cared, you know. And now the feds have made this KPI, and apparently there's money attached to it. If that's the reason for caring, whatever, but we should be caring without the money attached to it. But So I think design, I think leadership and self-involving narrative is really fundamental. But no amount of design will work without a cultural membrane around that says, we're in relationship with you as students, and we're here to partner with you and to hear what you've got to say and create a culture of respect. Because we know that design without respect is just a factory, you know. With respect, it becomes a co-creation experience. And that sounds highfalutin, but it's a felt experience for students. They know when they're being respected, and they'll step up to it, you know. So that's my little...
That's good. I like it. And so I mean, you mentioned students as partners, and I know I've noticed in the last 12 months particularly a lot more moving in that direction. Is that because we're starting to see a bit of a groundswell, do you think?
Yeah, I think the students as partner stuff risks becoming a fad and falling over. In many ways it shouldn't, but I think it may, because I worry that the predominant narrative really is student as consumer. And I think that's got most of the energy behind it. Because if you think about students as partners, it almost exists as a corrective reaction against the dominant paradigm, which is students are here to consume some education, then get a product called a useful degree, and then go off and apply that degree in an employment context. And, you know, I think we need to be more sophisticated in the way we construct these narratives. So, for example, people seem to phrase them as one or the other. I think students are smart. They know that in some spaces, they are consumers. So if I've got a course that's crappily designed, it's got poor materials, et cetera, as a consumer, I expect the basic decency of having something that's presentable without typos and can be read and is available. You know, and in that sense, I have no problem with the student as consumer narrative. They're entitled to that level of consumption, if you like. You know what I mean? And then beyond that, I think student as learner is another narrative that we can run, which is about, yes, there's some stuff that you don't know and some stuff that we know. Let's help you learn some of that stuff. And I think one of the challenges is that we've stepped away from that space. And then the third narrative, I think, is student as partner, which is the socio-cultural co-creation space. But none of those narratives are mutually exclusive. They actually triple helix DNA. They mutually, you know, each for their own. And I think we often get into these Mexican standoffs and one narrative fighting against the other. Bring them together, integrate them, and see the holistic nature of the lived experience of the student. All are valid, you know.
Yeah, and I think that the risk also with looking as, and because I like the concept of student as partners for things like student mentoring, peer support programs, and actually involving them in the decision making. But yeah, I can see if you take that too far, it's almost like making them responsible rather than accepting responsibility for the things that we need to do as well as higher education providers.
Exactly, and it's what's that phrase, the McDonaldization of higher education, where you clear your own tray and you know your whole thing, you know, sort of. Some stuff is on us. That's right. We do know some things.
Which is good. That's what we're paid for, to know something.
Otherwise, my salary is a joke. Otherwise, that's right. So, you know, I think all of this speaks, I think, to shift in staff identity. You know, I think that's a major point of stress across the sector at the moment is what does it mean to be an academic or a university educator? And the goalposts are shifting all the time. You know, we expect pastoral care, we expect course design, we expect programmatic thinking. You know, whereas before it was I just teach my lecture and, you know, good luck if it connects with the other courses, but that's my lecture. You know, and so I think there's enormous tensions in what it means to be an academic and increasing complexity and demands on time, and now expected to be engaged with industry and so on and so on. And a lot of people signed up to be academics under the old gig. You know what I mean? Now this new gig's caught up with them and they're going, I'm not sure I want to do this. So I think we've got a lot of work to do with staff success to support student success. And I think as I talk to staff, they say, all this discourse of student success, but what about us? How can you help us so we can actually be useful to students, but also, you know, everything's about the students and we've almost a forgotten group in higher education. That's what staff say.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a bit overclaimed, but I think there's some truth to it. We could do more work in that space, you know, staff identity and staff success, enabling them to be what we want them to be. Because student success comes through staff enablement, you know.
And I think we make it a bit too complicated too. Like, and you know, we talk about academic to professional staff ratios, so we try and adjust those, but all we do is we shift the work. So then the academic is the administrator, they're the creative designer, they're the learner expert, and they're the marker and everything else. And it stops them from being able to actually focus on creating the content that actually serves the purpose. And we can have other experts.
I think you've named a really important point, which is the loneliness of the long distance academic, which is the kind of the individual practitioner model that and so if you've got an individual practitioner model, you keep inserting more expectations into the individual practitioner rather than saying, no, we're actually moving to a team-based model and let's allow that to grow and flourish to be what it could be. I think we've got some way to go with that yet, but I think you're spot on. Part of that is deprivatizing the classroom so that people don't feel threatened by that and losing their control of what they think they're doing. But part of it's also, I think, creating narratives in higher education that say, traditionally we talk about first, second and third space professionals. I think we need to stop that. It's one space and we're all in it. The third space professional sounds like they're just tacked on. Oh, look, there's a third space coming along for the ride. No. I think it's one space and we're all in there. And minimising the threat and maximising the opportunity. And I think academics will soon see that their workloads will go down. A well-designed course with a team around it has much fewer student complaints, much fewer student emails asking what are we supposed to be doing here. It just makes life easier. So we've got to find the self-interest in this narrative and show people that's actually not a threat, but actually a useful thing for their sustainability. That's my belief anyhow. That's my optimistic belief.
Yeah, and I think it is that getting that whole mindset shift. We've got the academic teams that need to sort of change their thinking and their framing, but then we've got the overall organisation that sort of says, yes, but this is how we operate. This is how a university operates. So this is the way things work, and it's like, yes. But they're not working.
Exactly right. Did you miss the email that said it's broken? Exactly. No, we've got a very antiquated business model, and I think it will take probably the stress of competition to finally help us wake up. Because if you think about the way we deliver, our overhead fixed costs are huge per course, and private providers and other providers can do per course offerings at much lower overheads. So we've got to find the unique value proposition of a university education and make it affordable. Now, that's a scary conversation for many people, and it should be scary, but I don't think the world's going to wait for these institutions to take their time to adapt. So, the conversation now about the future of higher education, universities as one player in an ecosystem of learning, but what is that unique role, and how can we not just privilege it, but actually optimize it? Going to be the big discussion. And I think it's the conversation of whole of life learning that will be part of that. As you were rightfully saying at the beginning here, the model of we take school leavers, we have them for a few years, we pump them out. They may come back to do a master's or not, but whatever. But we've done our job. It's like we've applied some treatment at the beginning and hope that treatment lasts for the rest of their life. Yep. So I think it's that whole of life learning. Where are we in that conversation? And more importantly, what's our value add more broadly in society? Because my God, the vibe of anti-intellectualism that's coming across the globe at the moment, and the rejection of evidence in the face of what are fundamentally global crises, both culturally and economically and environmentally. Universities have got a serious role to play in legitimating their value add, but brushing up on their brand as part of the civic conversation. I think, irrespective of student success, the concept of university, I think, needs refurbishment, and urgently. People in power aren't necessarily our friends, so. Well, that's pretty positive, isn't it?
It is. What a great. So that's all my questions. Did you have something positive too that we could end with? Some exciting things that you're working on?
Well, I do. I don't. I'm not a doomsayer, but I just think I think there are big issues that we need to tackle, and we are tackling them. But I think there's an urgency that's not being appreciated. I think the time frames to deal with some of these issues are a lot shorter than people think they are. And so that's fine. In coming back to the notion of student success and a more focused conversation about that, I think everybody agrees that we cannot hope that the paradigm of accidental learning, which is what higher education was based on previously, will sustain us. I think we're now in the game, and universities are saying this with increasing clarity. We are intentional institutions. We intend to make a difference and make an impact. And the shift to design, the shift to leadership as a key construct or key capability in higher education. All these are signalling that there is appreciation that we have a value proposition to put on the table and that we are stepping up to it. So I'm very optimistic, and I'm more optimistic about the fact that we're actually trialing different ways of doing this, not just one. Traditionally, it was one size fits all. Now we're being much more agile in the way we think about how we might deliver, and that's online, mass courses, extended courses, experientially based courses. So there's a lot more diversity in there, and diversity breeds innovation. And I think we've appreciated that innovation is going to be what's going to save us. So I'm all for it. So.
Awesome. Very good. And are there any projects that you're working on at the moment, Alf, or any research that you're doing?
Yeah, look, I'm very interested in how people do or don't use evidence.
Okay.
So, there's a lot of talk about evidence-based practice and versus practice-based practice. And so you'll see this in the K-12 sector a lot, where you get a lot of research saying this is what makes for effective learning, and the teachers in the classroom just don't engage with it. And they say this research doesn't really appreciate the complexities of classroom practice, and there's almost a warfare between what the evidence says and what the practitioners are saying works or doesn't work for them. And I think we are in danger of creating, we're in danger of not honestly calling that so much of what we've done to date has been based on the apprenticeship model of education. This is how I was taught, and this I'll just keep replicating that. And look, I've done a few things, it seems to work, I'll just keep doing that. And it's very much a private reflective cycle and an apprenticeship cycle. And I'm kind of interested in how to introduce evidence into that cycle where staff don't feel threatened by what the evidence might say about their practice. And because I think at the end of the day, this whole movement the whole movement to transformation will be based on staff's capacity to learn new ways of doing things and feel good about themselves in doing that. But at the moment we have a narrative of disruption, which scares people. We say, oh, your practice is going to be disrupted. This is going to be very good for everybody. Well, it was just, you wonder why they run away in fear and panic. The language is just wrong. So it's how do we gently introduce data, enable them to have conversations with their data, and they feel empowered and enabled by that. And it's not rocket science. So I'm thinking at the moment about how to use data-informed conversation as a tool for professional learning.
Yeah.
That's one of many things I'm doing, but that's probably the one I think that's got the most alignment with what we're talking about today. So.
Yeah, no, that sounds really good. And I like that. And it is, you see, I think about when my parents, they were both primary school principals, primary school teachers, and they went through from the whole, you go to teachers college, you're automatically allocated a role and progress through. And there were always the people who would do it the way that we've always done it. And here in any organisation, we've always done it that way. We tried that before, 50 years ago, and it didn't work. But having that ability to have an open conversation about, okay, well, what if we tried it in a slightly different way? Or, okay, so that's a different way of approaching what I thought we'd done before, and just, changing, coming back to mindset again, what we were talking about earlier, isn't it?
Exactly right. But I think often as researchers, we fail to respect the practice and the practitioners. We come in with this bright, shiny new finding and don't realise that every finding contains within an implied blame of practice. Guess what? Subtext, you've been doing this wrong all along. Oh, thanks for that feedback. I feel so much better about myself as a professional right now.
So. And sometimes, I know when we do research, often it's quite a small cohort that we're working with. And so it's easy for other people to say, oh, but that won't work with mine because they're different. You haven't done it with that particular group.
Yes, exactly right. Niche-based knowledge.
Yeah. So that's been really good. Thank you. I've really enjoyed our conversation, Alf. That's been really great.
Thank you for allowing me to get on my soapbox.
Oh, no worries. I love soapboxes. They're so much fun.